Greetings, everyone. My name is Davina Liggins, and I'm with Healing Made Whole. And today we're going to talk about type 2 diabetes. Now, I have a goal for type 2 diabetes, in that by the end of 2023, we can have no new cases of type 2 diabetes. By and large, we can have no new cases of type 2 diabetes. Why do I say that? Why do I make such a bold claim? It's because type 2 diabetes is a perfect example of a lifestyle disease or disorder. That's it. It's not genetic, and I'll explain what I mean by that in a second. Type 2 diabetes does not have to exist for most of the cases. And because of that, there's no need for new cases. So let me explain type 2 diabetes and why I'm making such bold claims, and why I would love for you and your family, our community, to jump aboard and eradicating type 2 diabetes from our communities. So type 2 diabetes starts off with the lifestyle, what one eats. So it's also referred to as carb toxicity. Carbohydrates. Carbohydrate toxicities, overload, too much carbs in the diet. Most Americans eat about 350 to 400 grams of carbs a day. It's overload. It's too much, to the point that it causes toxicity to the body. It throws off the system, and then uncontrolled glucose levels arise. And then there's the diagnosis of diabetes. So, how does this happen? So, prolonged eating of high levels of carbohydrates day after day, year after year, decade after decade leads to a situation called insulin resistance. And so, what happens is all the cells in the body use glucose, have the ability to use glucose for energy source. So, as you eat, the blood glucose levels rise. As you eat carbohydrates, blood glucose levels rise. And it's essential that that glucose in the blood moves into the cells in the body, because high glucose levels in the blood is very toxic. It causes tissue damage. I'll get to that in a second. So the cells are supposed to take up that glucose. So that way the glucose in the blood drops, is now in the cells, and can be used for energy. However, what happens is, if meal after meal there's such a high levels of carbohydrates and glucose levels now in the body, the cells are like, hey, we haven't even processed the glucose from the meal before, the snack before, and now here you are coming giving us more glucose. We don't want it. So the cells become resistant to insulin. So insulin is the hormone that's responsible for moving the glucose out of the bloodstream into the cells. It's a little bit more complicated than that, but it's pretty much that's what it is. Insulin binds to the cell surface, to its receptor. That opens up the gate now for glucose to enter into the cell. That's it. And so the cells are like, hey, we have too much glucose already. We don't need any more. The cells start to become resistant to that signal from insulin. So what happens? Your body doesn't take this laying down, because it has to get that glucose out of the blood. So the pancreas starts ramping up more insulin, trying to push the system and your cells now to take up that glucose, because it doesn't want the glucose in the blood, because it will start causing damage. So after a while, it starts reinforcing this insulin resistance, because every meal there's a high level of carbs coming. The body doesn't even have a chance to utilize and process the glucose it got. And this is happening year after year, day after day, decade after decade. And what happens is, now the person is in a state of hyperinsulinemia, where they have high levels of glucose, or high levels of insulin. And at that point, the insulin levels are high enough to be able to keep the glucose in normal range, but that symptom is called hyperinsulinemia, and I'll talk about that in another video. That's another disorder that is oftentimes not talked about. And what happens is over time, the insulin cannot keep up. The pancreas cannot keep up with this high level production of insulin that is required to get this glucose in the cell. This high carb diet, it can't manage it anymore. So you have insulin resistance. The pancreas is starting to secrete a little less insulin, and then you start seeing glucose levels going up. This is called prediabetes. You're not diabetic, but your doctor may be saying, hey, your A1C is getting a little up there. Hey, your glucose levels or your fasting glucose levels are not in normal range. You need to do something about it. I want you to do something about it. You do not want diabetes, type 2 diabetes, period. So over time, insulin resistance is getting worse. The pancreas is really not able to keep up with this high carb diet. And then the glucose levels in the blood end up in high levels such that now you have the diagnosis of diabetes. That's one way. That's the initiation of type 2 diabetes. There is a second component that I want you to be aware of that contributes to high glucose levels, and that is called gluconeogenesis. Now, I talked about insulin resistance, where the cells cannot respond to insulin properly. Well, what happens is gluconeogenesis is stopped by insulin. So gluconeogenesis, let me take a step back. Gluconeogenesis is the process by which amino acids, proteins that you eat, we get broken down into amino acids, and fats that you eat can be converted into glucose. Okay? And that process is called gluconeogenesis. And so what happens is insulin puts the brakes on that process, because insulin goes up when you eat carbohydrates. It also goes up when you eat proteins, but not to the same extent. So when you're eating carbohydrates, that gets broken down into glucose. So in that moment, you don't need your body to make any glucose for you because you've taken in glucose through your diet. So insulin goes up, it puts the brakes on gluconeogenesis, and your body is like, okay, we don't need you to make, this is processed in the liver, we don't need you to make any glucose. He or she, they've taken in glucose in the diet, let's put a brake on it. And what happens in insulin resistance, that process, the brakes is not on because the body is not responding to insulin properly. So gluconeogenesis goes uncontrolled. At least not as controlled as it should be with insulin. So those are the two mechanisms. One is initiated by eating too high a level of carbs. It throws off the system, creates insulin resistance. And then as a result, the gluconeogenesis pathway is turned on, and then you have your body making glucose in the face of already high levels of glucose. So this is what happens when a lot of people wake up in the morning and they take the blood stick and they're like, hey, my glucose levels are high. I haven't eaten in like 8-10 hours. I've been asleep. Well, that's why, because the brakes on that gluconeogenesis pathway has been released because of insulin resistance. And you see how this thing keeps feeding forward. So how do we solve this issue? Number one, cut the carbs. Cut the carbs. That's how you solve it. But before I get there, why do I say it's not a genetic disorder? So particularly, it's been said time and time again that African Americans have a higher risk or rate of diabetes. Well, let me just say this to that response. If our genetic pool, if our genetic makeup is not able to process 200, 300, and 400 grams of carbs a day, such that if we do that, disease results in our body, what is the real issue? Is it my genetic makeup at fault? Or is it my lifestyle that's driving this? So I pose the question to all of you. If your body cannot handle the level of carbs that you are eating such that you're becoming pre-diabetic, or I should say hyperinsulin, have hyperinsulinemia. Then you become pre-diabetic, and then you become diabetic. Where is the real issue? Your body is telling you, hey, I can't process that like that. Cut it back, cut it back. You're tilting the balance. You're tilting that balance, and you're throwing me off, and you're pushing me into the direction of disease. And there's power in what I'm saying because, we've been told for so long that, because our mama had it, because our grandmother had it, our aunts, our uncles, my niece, it looks like she's getting it. Look, it's all genetic. It's in my family. It's running through my family. And we don't have the power or whatever to reverse this. Well, it's just my fate. No, it's not. Your body is telling you you're tilting the balance to a disease. Back off. And when I'm trying to get across to all of you is to do just that. Back off. Back off the carbs. Allow your body to regain insulin sensitivity, which is very possible. The body is meant to heal itself. It's meant to heal itself. So back off, allow the body to heal, regain insulin sensitivity, and you go on with your life. Now, why is this important? Because high levels of glucose, uncontrolled glucose in the bloodstream leads to kidney disease. It leads to eye disease, including blindness. It leads to cardiovascular disease. It leads to loss of limbs, completely debilitation. It leads to kidney failure and dialysis. Glucose, uncontrolled glucose in the bloodstream is like steel wool running through the veins and the arteries. It causes problems. I'll get to that in another video. So what do you need to do? Like I said, cut the carbs. To what level? Whatever level is necessary to correct that imbalance, regain sensitivity. Some of you may need to get down to 100 carbs, no more than 100 carbs a day. Some of you may need to get down to 50. Do what you need to do. Work very closely with your doctor. If you are on insulin, you need to be careful in cutting your carbs sharply because you need to inform your doctor on what you're doing, and they may need to start adjusting your insulin and working with you. Okay. Another thing is to make sure you are eating whole foods, natural looking foods. And that means cutting out as much processed foods as you can. Now, when I say cut the carbs, what does that look like? That looks like wheat bread. That looks like white bread, cakes, cookies. It looks like potatoes. It looks like fruit. Some people do a little bit of berries every now and then. They choose the fruit with the lowest level of carbohydrates in them. You have to work that out. And I'll be talking more about this as time goes on. But the goal here, the point of this video is that there's nothing wrong with your body. You just have found yourself in a situation of carb toxicity. You can reverse that. And by 2023, I'm starting this campaign. I don't know what this is going to look like, but I'm just tired of all of this diabetes that is going around running rampant in our communities. And it doesn't have to exist. We're not broken as a people. Our bodies, there's nothing wrong with us. We just need to come in alignment with the physiology of our body. Come in alignment with the physiology of our body and allow it to heal and reset itself. Hopefully this was helpful to someone. Please share the word. Please share the word. This gets deep. I understand there's a lot of things going on, specifically in the Black community, that can look like a hurdle, but we're going to overcome these hurdles. We're going to jump over them. As a community, we're going to come together and we're going to support each other, because this is one disease that we can pull up from the root. I mean, pull it up from the root and let it go. It doesn't need to plague us anymore. This is type 2 diabetes is on its way out. Hopefully this was helpful to someone. I'll be here talking more about this and how we can unroll this. But by the end of 2023, this is going to be gone. Y'all take good care and be blessed.